All right, everyone, what's going on? Welcome to the very first episode of Fireside Wisdom. This is a podcast dedicated to exploring life in all of its facets, from emotional to spiritual to social to physical. We want to talk about it all. We want to just explore it and have some real conversations. This podcast was actually born out of the fact that the three of us are really good friends. I'm Tim Burzens, this is Paul Rickards, and Trevor Rowe. Have had many wonderful conversations, late into the night, deep insights, very profound conversations. And after a while, we had enough friends tell us that we needed to record these conversations because they would be useful for other people. And we hope that you find some value out of it. So we're going to dive right in. We don't want to spend a lot of time on introductions because I think as we start talking, you're going to get to know who we are. I don't think the credentials are necessarily as important as the energy that we're going to bring to this and the conversation that we're going to have. But it is helpful to have a little bit of context and a little bit of background about each of the people. So I'll start. I'll go first. My name is Tim Burzens. I've been in the health and fitness space for quite some time. I worked at a startup company in Florida, and when I was there, I was doing a lot of marketing for a couple big fitness brands. And in 2017, had a bunch of things change for me. My entire world basically turned around, and it led to a bunch of questions, deeper questions about life, understanding about, asking the questions about what's the purpose of all this, or how am I what's my part in creating this that I'm experiencing in my life? How does it all work together? And so in the last few years, I've been going hard on those insights, trying to understand those things, sitting with a lot of the emotional stuff that comes up, sitting with a lot of things that might be conditioning and wondering, is this true? Actually investigating, is this true, or is this just something that I believe? And it's led me to a lot of great insights that I'm hopefully going to be able to share with you guys. So, Paul.
All right. Hey guys. Name is Paul. 36 years old. Business owner. Young professional, I guess you call it that. Has spent a lot of time doing a lot of deep introspection and taking the journey inward and trying to just analyze myself and find a way for me to better respond to things in life and instead of react to them, and just trying to find a journey on the path, a better way to find myself to a place of peace in my life. And met these guys a couple of years ago, and we hit it off really quickly and figured out that we just have a lot in common and a lot to share with each other, and we hope to be able to, through this platform, share those things with you and bring awareness to a lot of topics and a lot of just different things that we see the need for awareness in. Don't have much to say about that other than it's going to be a great ride, and we are so happy to bring you guys along with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Trevor.
Hello, I'm Trevor Rowe, and I'm only 22 years old. Foremostly, I'm a martial artist. I have my second degree black belt under the Zen Nihon Sogabudo Renmi, and I'm also an engineering student. I'll be graduating soon, and we have really great conversations just about the nature of life and questioning everything, questioning the way that we look at things, and trying to get to really helpful answers in understanding our lives and the lives of those around us. Not sure if I can say that any better.
Yeah, well said.
Awesome.
Perfect. And as you see, we have our fire going here. We plan to continue the Fireside Wisdom theme, continuing to have the fire in the background during all of our talks. We've talked about how it's going to be difficult in the summer, but we'll figure that out when we cross that road. So again, the intention of this podcast is really to explore your inner emotional reality and how that affects the outer world, and where we see a lot of people struggling and some of the pain that comes up and the suffering that comes up as a part of the human conditioning. So, one of the things we wanted to touch on in this first episode was basically emotional baggage and being triggered emotionally, because especially in the world we're living in right now, there's so many people just getting triggered by so much that we see, and it creates a blindness. Personally, I think that as soon as you get triggered, there's a contraction of your energy and an unwillingness to see the other side or be open to new information or understanding, and it creates these silos of information that separate us from each other. And ultimately, this is all from over-identification with the mind. We can get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to start by asking these guys, what they do when they feel themselves get emotionally triggered, or how they deal with their emotional baggage, and what their process is for that. So,
yeah, I want to jump right on that and say that the barrier comes from the separation between your perceived reality and what reality actually is. You know, what information is coming to you and the way that you understand it does not necessarily mean that what you're noticing is completely real all the time. And, you know, based on what background of information we have, we might perceive new information in a certain way. And I like what you said about, like, when your feelings get hurt, we do tend to shut down and we like to dig our heels in. And that's not good for developing an understanding of the world.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, you know, I do tend to retreat into myself a little bit when I encounter difficult times. And I'm critical of myself for mostly always. And so it's a big challenge for me to get over my feelings of inadequacy and just reaching for what is it that I'm able to do and committing myself to the actions that feel right at the time. And so I don't have an easy answer for it because I'm still working on that. But I try to just keep my head up and stay productive, and then that keeps me moving forward.
Yeah, it's one of those things about finding that line between what you can control and what you can't control. There's an exercise early on that that I had experienced when I was working on a lot of like success mindset orientation kind of stuff, that basically was like draw a circle and then draw a circle around that circle. In the inner circle, write everything that's in your control. On the outer circle, write everything that's out of your control. And in that gray area, write everything that you think you have control over or you don't have control over. And the intention of the exercise is move everything in that middle to either outside or inside. Either make it something that you can take control over or let it go completely, because that gray area is what drains your energy. It's where you leak a lot of your energy, and it makes you less productive and less efficient. So
is that because of attachment?
Because of attachment, that's I guess that would depend on if you were. I think that brings up the question of attachment, because if there's something that's in the gray area, then the question is, are you attached to trying to control something that you can't control and therefore need to let it go? Or are you not doing something that you know you should be doing and therefore need to pull it into the inside of the circle? Mm-hmm. I think that balance is something that can only be explored individually.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think for me, as far as dealing with the emotional rigors that life throws at you, I spent so much time just kind of surviving a lot of those situations. I don't come from a background where emotional facets were explored, and the finding your way through them was like something championed and something looked at as desirable for a person. And what I mean by that is that I come from a very kind of rigid construct of existence, and my childhood was very much just, you know, be on it, be working hard, and, you know, your feelings don't matter. What matters is the result. And if you're spending too much time thinking or feeling about something, well, you're probably not being as productive as you could be. But I recognize now, especially in the last couple of years, where I'm learning more and more about the depth of that and how that did cause like early trauma for me, and I'm finding my way through it. And I recognize that I do have the ability to kind of take in these feelings and to learn a lot from that, and just really spend time sitting with those things and discovering myself in it as well. And with that, also learning how to be just a better human and more compassionate and more patient and more understanding of other people, and the uplift that happens from that on both sides. It's fantastic. It's been a great journey so far, and I'm still practicing really hard instead of like, you know, becoming all closed off and just reacting to things. I have to think about, like, oh, let me respond in a kind and gentle way. A path of peace, again, is like the goal here for me. So,
and I think that brings up a really good point, which is the illusion that it's better to, or that you're being productive, or that there's something better about shutting down the emotions and just doing the action.
Yep.
And there's a time and place when, you know, you got to get shit done,
Yeah.
and you have to do it.
Of
course, there's a time when that happens. But coming into your emotional reality and recognizing that, you know, I've used this term before, where rather than seeing yourself as a thinking being that also feels as a subside thing, that if you switch that and sort of consider yourself as a feeling being that thinks, then it changes the way that you view everything. So we're always having these emotional reactions to things. We're always in these different emotional fields, and that is what supplies the meaning to life. So life is sort of a blank canvas. We're always applying our meaning to it, and I think a lot of that has to do with emotional realities. The question is, are you activating the emotional realities that serve you and serve others, and that you want to be the story that you want to be telling in life? Or is it something that was conditioned into you from a young age? Or if we, you know, were to talk about like karma and things like that, like is this baggage, this emotional baggage that you keep activating, which is like your emotional wounds and your triggering, is that serving you? Is that something that you actually want to tell the story of in life? Or is it just that you're caught in the pattern and you haven't recognized what you're doing yet? So you're sort of like sleepwalking in a circle and haven't really.
I think it's both things.
Come
And
out of
I think it's definitely both things, and it can manifest in so many different ways. It allows a person, when they take the time to really examine themselves, to see what the path forward in that looks like for them, and it gives them, if you do really are honestly looking at yourself and you take the time and you're like, man, I'm finding myself really uncomfortable, or really like losing relationships, or I'm really volatile, or I'm just insecure about a lot of my responses to things, and I'm wondering why life isn't reacting the way I want it to react to the way that I'm being. And then you're in a dark place. Then you're like, wow, like how did I get here? It's a wonderful place to be, as much as it is terrible, because you can only really go up from there. Like any direction you pick at that point, it could be a positive thing. Now, it's very easy to fall back into that, well, this is just where I belong, this is just my life and my conditioning, like you just talked about. And that's what I think a very common response looks like, because we're like, oh, well, this is my life. I'm made to suffer for whatever reason, and I don't deserve better things, or treating myself better, or seeking knowledge for its own sake, and then applying it to my life. I mean, the work being done is often uncomfortable, and how do we get people to recognize that there's glory in that, there's a beautiful opportunity to become more than what you are, and all that's available to you out there, and if you seek it, and there's avenues, and there's all kinds of help all around you for that. And I always try to remind myself too, like, dude, like you're doing it again, like you're not allowing yourself to treat yourself well. You know what I mean? You're not putting yourself in that mental state where like, okay, this is my condition and it's comfortable and I understand it, but man, it sucks. I'd really rather not do that. But this other thing, which is so new and it's just strange to me, and I'm so afraid to try it.
Yeah.
But that's where I really want to be.
Fear, yeah.
Yeah, but the fear response is like, oh, I just want to stay where I'm at and hold on to things.
Absolutely. There's a contraction that happens from that. It's stepping into the unknown. You never want to. That's the human mind, as a survival strategy, doesn't want to go into the unknown. It doesn't know what's there, so it can't predict it. It can't.
We're naturally afraid of the unknown.
Exactly.
Do you think you do that? Trevor, you think you do that sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. I'm afraid to do the thing that I know is right, or even to ask myself the question that I know will lead to the answer that I need to hear. Sometimes we don't like to hear what we need to. But I think that, going back to what you said earlier, there's certainly different levels of awareness of our own situation. And introspection is a really useful tool in understanding where you're at right now. But for all of our listeners that may be at different levels of questioning themselves now, maybe we should start from the bottom of this base awareness, where I think that the lowest level of awareness is repeatedly being exposed to situations where you just do the next indicated thing, and you surrender your locus of power to be completely external, and you allow the circumstances of your life to guide you in your decision making, when really the awakened mind and the better way to handle it is to make the correct decision to guide the circumstances into where you want to go.
Do you think that at the base level you're like a raw, instinctual kind of animal that doesn't really know anything else or how to be another way, so they're just reacting just because that's all they know? And the opportunity presents itself to learn something different, you're automatically shut off to it, because it's like the fear response again. Oh no, this is all I know, so I'm going to stay with what I know and just stay in that raw place.
I think that it is very easy to do that, and it's easy from an awakened perception to say, like, if I'm up here and people are not asking questions and they're down here, like, yeah, they seem like blind animals. But we all have a higher thinking ability and the rationality and feelings at the core of it all that guide us to what is true. Our immediate feelings are probably a good sense of direction. And one of the things that I like to talk about a lot with the human condition are fundamental attributes that everybody shares. And I think one of those attributes is compassion. We all have compassion for each other at a very low level, even, the most reprehensible of criminals. And I can back that up, but the simple story goes, how did you learn everything that you know, from language to motor ability to all the simple things that you don't really think about? And us as social creatures absolutely depend on each other to uplift one another.
And there's a lot of truth to that, but there's also the element of no one teaches you to walk. You walk on your own. This is an Ido Portal thing. that no one taught you to walk. There was something inside of you that learned how to walk on your own. And I think that also speaks to the fact that you can't, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had many conversations with people where you recognize where they don't want to drink, no matter how you can do all the work and set everything up and all. It's literally the what is the God and Adam thing, where God's reaching out and Adam's just lip finger, doesn't want to touch. If he just touched, omnipotence would fill him and he would have all the insight of the world. It's a symbology for how a lot of people might approach life, where if you set everything up that little bit, all they have to do is just touch their finger and there it is for you. But the question is, why don't you reach? Why are you attached to staying small? And I think it goes back to the fear. There's a fear of the unknown. Well, if I do that, then who would I be if I didn't have what I thought that I was? Well, if you touch that knowledge, your view of yourself is going to change. Your entire self-image is going to be obliterated. And that's terrifying.
That's terrifying.
Not to cut you off, but in that it's as a person taking accountability. It's a person taking on the responsibility, and that's the biggest fear, is like the weight that needs to be carried beyond, the acceptance of that responsibility. It's
Right.
like, am I able? Am I worth that?
Absolutely.
And that's an unknown place.
The courage to be the leader, courage and wisdom, I would say, the courage and wisdom to be the leader, but also the ability to own the worth of being the leader. Because if you don't see yourself as worthy, then we fall into that trap of kind of what you were saying, where it's like, why would I even help myself? Like, what's the point of even doing any of that? Like, I'm this miserable worm, blah, 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 blah. Part of that is also the recognition that when, we've heard a lot of in the spiritual world about like waking up out of the ego, or at least like becoming aware of the ego and understanding that there is something called the inferior ego, which is, I'm smaller than everyone else. I'm this tiny little worm. The universe and God hates me, this little tiny thing. Well, isn't that a form of superiority? How arrogant is it to say that the entire universe cares what happens to you, this tiny little thing? And it's not to say that there isn't compassion and care for you. Of course, like, it's abundant around us if you can tap into it. But it does highlight the fact that there is this juice that you can get out of that sort of story that you tell yourself. You get some payoff out of it. And that payoff is this small little self-importance of, I'm more sick than you. I suffer more than you. I'm X, Y, and Z. And if someone wants to argue that they're suffering more than me, it's like, okay, well, you're doing it. You're doing it.
Yeah.
Like, you're arguing for your own.
And you make it real. You bring it about for yourself. If you want to suffer, you will.
Yeah.
And the people who do that absolutely put themselves on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Just to say, "Woe is me."
And that's not to say that we don't have compassion for like for that kind of person who doesn't know what they're doing, right? Because that's ultimately what it is. If someone knew what they were doing, they wouldn't do it anymore.
They wouldn't do it.
But they don't realize that they're stuck in a certain level of awareness, and so they're repeating conditioned cycles, getting the pleasure out of it that they can and resisting the pain that they can, and just sort of repeating cycles.
Tim, who was it that talks about the shadow self?
There's a lot. Carl Jung is probably
Jung.
the main one.
Okay.
It also leaks into some of the Freudian stuff too.
So that's
Yeah.
like a dependency on the shadow, right? Because the shadow tells you the lie. And that egoic lie of like, oh, well, you're, like you said, that worm, that person that doesn't deserve good things, and like, you belong here in this shit that you're in, and the only way out of it is to just adapt to it and become that thing. But that's not all you are, right? And then that's something I always have struggled with. Well, not always, but I just recognized that it was a struggle in the last few years, that the egoic place that I go to where I just need to be hard, and I need to like be struggling, or I'm not, doing enough to feel like worthy of succeeding. You know what I mean? If I'm not struggling. And it's such a weird balance, that, because it is seductive. It's really, really seductive to get in that place of like just hardness, you know what I mean? And like, I'm this immovable thing, but it's false power.
It's sort of being intoxicated on power.
Oh yeah, it's a freaking ego trip, right?
Yeah.
And you get so inflated in that, and it's so easy to get lost in it. And I'm just now really starting to scratch the surface after the last couple of years of really tapping into that and figuring out why. And it's because of insecurity and anxiety and feeling less than. That's where that comes from.
Yeah, so it's ultimately like a defense against, I don't want the possibility of what I fear about myself to be true, so I will create a hard wall and fight it.
Yep.
Well, that takes so much energy, right? That takes so much effort to to hold that thing in place.
Yeah.
And so the question is, if you let that in and integrated it and sat with it and made it a part of yourself, how much more energy would you have to be effective? If you weren't fearing how small or insecure you were, then what would you be capable of? Because you wouldn't have to be continuously resisting this. You wouldn't see a situation that might be neutral and see it as something that's an attack on you, because you're playing that story, right? So you're like looking at the content contextualizing it in the way that makes sense for your story, your conditioned story that you're telling yourself, and then having that experience and watching it unfold literally in the way that you are telling the story.
Let's talk about that, because what we're discussing here is bringing up your level of awareness and understanding something closer to the truth, the real reality, not just your perceived reality.
Yeah.
But how do you do that? How do you reconcile that where you are may not be viewing things in total truth?
Yeah.
Or
I'd say it's education.
shadow.
It's education. It's honesty. Being honest with yourself and recognizing that maybe all the things you have done up until this point might be absolutely wrong, and figuring out a way to navigate that and be okay with that, and then recognizing that guess what, everything you do after now could be moving you towards the right thing for you. And the
That's
right
a
knowledge
tough
for
pill to
yourself.
swallow.
That's again accountability, responsibility, being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, you're not doing this right. And I know I'm not doing this right. How do I do this better? Well, there's plenty of knowledge out there, and take the step forward. Take responsibility for your life. Be able to be good enough to yourself to know when you're being bad to yourself and everyone else around you, whatever the case.
So I tend to view it a little bit more on the energy of attractor fields. You could think of it that way, that when you hold a certain energy, you are magnetizing different experiences to yourself, which is kind of the same thing of what I just said about viewing the content within a certain context. You're contextualizing everything you see, something that might be neutral, turning it into the story, into something that feeds your story.
Right.
So that's like an attractor field, right? It's like an energy pattern that you're magnetizing this experience to yourself by viewing content in a certain way. And so if everyone's doing that to a certain degree, and we're all playing these games and playing these stories throughout the world, then one thing that starts to come up is that some people are nowhere near ready to wake up, right? They're not ready to blossom in their awareness, to actually question themselves and look at these things. And there was a scholar, I forget who it was, or I think it was a monk, that said something along the lines of, it's actually a violent act to try to wake someone up who's not ready for it, or to teach someone something that they're not wanting it, they're not ready for it. And so I think that it's important to recognize that when unconscious people who are just stuck in their conditioning, if they show up into your life and you experience them, not to react to them, because if you do, then basically you're showing your own unconsciousness, right? They're pulling your unconsciousness out of you. And if that happens, which is, of course, like we started this podcast off with, like the world right now is full of a bunch of unconscious reactions happening between a bunch of different parties who are all just reacting to each other. And so everyone's getting triggered emotionally, and there's all this stuff that's happening. So if instead, if for someone, again, this has to be a choice, so it can't be something that you force on someone and say you need to wake up. It has to be, this is your choice if you want to do this. But when you're ready and you're saying this tightness, this like all of this anger that I'm feeling every single day from what's going on in the world or from people around me or whatever, all of that, you eventually get to the point where you say, I'm done with this.
You need to
no
release.
more. Like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then you wake up. That's what it is. And then you're willing to say, I'm going to change the way that I'm being. It doesn't matter if what out there changes, because I don't want to do this anymore. I'm changing.
It's not about them. It's about you
exactly.
in that situation.
Yeah.
And I want to go really slow here for the people who maybe are hearing these things for the first time.
Sure. Yeah.
But like, when you say feeling or existing in an energy field, and what that means really, and to me that just means to hold an attitude and to not contextualize what may be neutral events. Like that was a huge thing for me, starting to say this is neutral, this does not have meaning. I do not need to, when the barista hands me my cup of coffee and gives me a funny look, I do not need to contextualize that and feel anxiety about that. It is a neutral event.
Understanding your personality and recognizing where we're all flawed and we're all making mistakes all the time, and some of us are bumbling through life in a way that we don't understand, and you're going to come across people that just are not going to get you, and are not interested in getting you, and they're only interested in their perspective and their way and their life as it is moving. And that takes a lot of patience and a lot of compassion to exist in the world today. And I think that so many people just fall into a place of anger, frustration, and impatience because it's easy. It's easy to be mad at somebody for them encroaching on you. It's difficult to be wanting to understand why and wanting to be compassionate with that individual or moment in your life that is uncomfortable, because that's where the work's going to be done for you, and that's how we're going to get to where we can understand each other better, and we're just creating a better existence all around us all the time, which is what we are trying to do within our small community of friends. And not that any of us at any given moment can't encroach on the other because we're so aware of each other's energy, is that we allow each other the opportunities to make mistakes so that we can help each other through those mistakes and become a better person and enhancing our community at the same time. And I want that so much for the world. It's like a stress for me almost, because I see people being terrible to each other all the time, and not to get on too high of a soapbox about it, but it's ugly and it's unfair and it's the existence that we're in. But that's also part of reality too, where you're going to have that. Because you can't really have one without the other.
Right.
And I gotta go off a tangent. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
no,
No,
I
I
think
agree.
that's beautiful, and I think it's helpful to come at it with compassion. Like, again, not get triggered by someone else's unconsciousness. So if someone else is acting in a certain way, if you feel yourself getting triggered, then that's an immediate. At least that's the way that I want to approach it anyway. Is that if I get triggered, the immediate reaction is, oh, something's happening within me. Like, it's, you didn't do this to me. Like, this is happening because of me. And I think that's all. And it's obviously I'm not perfect at it. Like, I fail a ton, obviously, but it's one of those things that I think is an example of taking responsibility for your consciousness, which means that anything that you experience is within your purview. It's not outside of your purview. It's not that someone else is responsible for it. And that, for a lot of people who are very logically based, like very scientific materialist type of person, that doesn't seem to land. Like, no, clearly you're doing this to me. If you weren't doing that, I wouldn't feel this way.
And that's analyzing the circumstances.
Right, exactly. But there's the question of, there is another type of person in that situation who would not feel bad
They
that
would
this
be
was happening.
empathetic.
So clearly that means that it's not the outer circumstances that are causing it. It's the person experiencing that is having that reaction.
Your perception of the reality of what you're in.
Your perception, exactly.
Yeah. Everyone perceives things differently. And we're all living our own reality, and we're intertwining each other's realities and trying to make sense of it all. The human condition it begs for that to be combative. It begs for it to be divisive, and it certainly allows a lot of space for people to get it wrong, because we do all the time. And I guess the goal would be to get it wrong as gently as we can.
Well, and I think that also,
endeavor.
I like that idea of, like, we're all playing games, or we're all telling stories together. And so everyone is sort of interacting on whatever level of the game they want to play.
Yeah.
And that's why I've had this experience many times where there's someone or something in my life that I'm like, I wish was not there, and I just release completely on it, and I don't play that game. And then almost magically, it's like, they're just gone out of my experience. And it's like, okay, like, clearly there's some sort of organizing principle. And again, that's the attractor field or magnetic quality to the energies that we're holding. That sort of have this ability to bring things into your life. And so even like Paul, so your story with, so Paul owns a landscaping business, and he went through a time when he first started it, that he was worried about getting clients or if he had enough money. So I'll let you tell that story, about how letting go through that.
Well, it was really interesting because the first year of the business, I just left my job that I was at for almost 10 years, and I had some money set aside to give myself a little cushion, but it wasn't a year's worth or even 6 months worth. It was literally like a couple of months worth of money, and that in general, as we all know, is a huge stress in life, is making sure that we have all the basic necessities, and money is how we get that. So it sounded really silly the way I said that. But in any capacity, I was under a lot of stress to find clients and to develop an income and build a business from the ground. And I got to a point where, I had like $50 in my bank account, and I was literally like a week or two away from needing to pay out a lot of money for bills that I had coming up. And one day I was just riding in my truck, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and I was like, you know what, dude? We're not going to stress about this anymore. We're not going to rack our head about things we can't control. We're going to do everything that we can, put ourselves in the best situation to succeed, and just release it and allow the universe to give me what it thinks I deserve or what I need, or put things in my path, and opportunities will come to me. And literally within, I think it was a couple of hours, I got a phone call with a contract that quick, and with that job, all my bills were paid for the month. And then after doing that job, within a couple of days, it was exponential. And it just, for whatever reason, at that point, the universe was like, that's all I was waiting for you to do. It was just stop trying to control it.
Yeah,
Stop trying to, physically manifest through your own volition all the things you think you're supposed to have, and just be ready to receive all the things. And by that, I mean, when opportunity comes, take opportunities, and also learn how to say no to opportunities and recognize your boundaries. And I'm learning all of those things. And it was a wonderful awakening moment, and it was a huge level up for me. I felt like I went from like level 3 to level 7, like that. And that's the way I run my business now. I literally just call people back, show up when I'm supposed to show up, and do everything I was saying I'm supposed to do. And work just shows up, and it just keeps coming, and it's gotten better and better. Tim helps me with the business. Trevor has worked with me some too. We've all had an opportunity to share in that experience, and it's been beautiful, and I love it.
I loved working with you the couple of days we came out, shoveling, pushing sod, pushing stone, whatever it's about. But I want to talk about, this is another thing that I think maybe people don't understand if they're hearing this for the first time, is the release and letting go, the act of letting go.
Right.
Who wrote that book?
I really like that you keep bringing it back to someone who might not know, because I know that we get lost a little bit in some of the...
We've had these conversations many times.
Yeah, so we want to go with them and everything. And I think people who might not be familiar with this, I think there's a level where they'll start to pick up if they listen enough. But I really appreciate that, because I think that's a really good intention.
Of course,
for this,
thank you.
especially for this first podcast. And yeah, so you bring up letting go, and so I mean, this is a basic growth tenet or spiritual tenet, or really it's like it's just a psychological facet of how we work as humans. But there is a book called Letting Go by David Hawkins. Even Eckhart Tolle's work, Power of Now,
Brand New World,
A New Earth.
Yeah, New Earth.
And there's so many other books that we talk about. Anything that has to do with this growth is really about letting go. It's about surrender. And when we talk about surrender, there's immediately this resistance that might come up where it's, I don't want to surrender, because if I surrender, that means I'm giving up, right? So we all think about it like, you're in a war. What if the other army was just like, yeah, come take my castle, that's fine. Like, okay, whatever. That's not what it's about.
That's surrender,
That
in a way.
It's surrender maybe on like a more physical way. Thank you, Carly. It's surrender maybe on a more physical way, but really what we're talking about when we talk about surrender is a release of the outcome, which frees you to pay attention to what is here right now. And if you're paying attention to what's here right now, then everything that you do is going to be the highest quality, because all of your attention is siloed into this moment, what's right in front of you, the action that you're doing. If you keep getting distracted because you keep thinking about the thing that you're going towards, rather than just focusing on what you're doing,
it diminishes the quality of your work.
Exactly.
Yeah, when your mind is elsewhere.
So what's more likely to create the outcome that you want? Getting distracted by this outcome that you want, or letting go of it and just doing what's right in front of you? And if you let go and do what's right in front of you, you're more likely to get the outcome that you want.
And then on top of that, if you are so attached to the thing that you want and you need it and you desire it, and then you don't get it, it's going to destroy your world. It's going to ruin your day, and you won't be happy. But if you let go of that connection with needing or absolute desire, the more you hold on to it. But if you let go,
this is the conversation of attachment. Yeah. This is the conversation of attachment. So it's the question of, if you're attached to something, then there's this idea of, when you don't have it and you want to get it, you're fearing that it won't come, right? So you're in fear before it comes. Then you get it, and now you're clinging to it, afraid that it might leave. And then it finally leaves, and now you're in grief because it left. Fear and grief the entire time. That's your experience, because you're attached to it.
Without even recognizing that is what you're doing by structuring your attachment.
Exactly. And so if you release that, then what is it? It'd be nice if it came. So I'm at peace. So you're no longer at negative trying to come back to zero. You're at zero, and anything that comes is positive. So you experience life as all positive. If it comes, that's great. Oh, it came. Great. I get to now enjoy this thing. That's awesome. Oh, it's gone. Well, that's okay. There's more stuff that's coming. It's this just all around. You're just like in a better state. You're enjoying life better, and you're more effective.
I would add to that peace, of course, is, it's so exponential, and it's so different for everybody across the board, where peace to one person is definitely different to somebody else. For me, peace doesn't always look like the absence of things and the absence of weight or the absence of stress. Often enough, for me, peace is the resistance that I get from all of the toiling that I've set forth in my life. And it's knowing that I'm on the path that I'm on, and doing that work is peaceful to me, because I know that I'm aligned with that peace, and I'm aligned with still the concept of letting go of things that I can't control, but also being aware of all the things that I'm influential in. And I like the word influential, because it's not a thing like, I control this thing, I make this thing. It's really easy to just say, oh, I can create. And we all create. We all have those moments of creativity, but being able to release the outcome, it's like doing things without the concept of your reward being the forefront of why you do things.
Yeah, exactly.
And the reward is the ability and the opportunity to do things.
Yeah.
And to try to do it in a way that affords you that patience and that concept of peace.
The outcome's the perk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If if I get paid at the end of the job, of course that's why I work, to make money, but that's not why I do what I do. I do what I do because I really enjoy what I do, and I really like creating things and obviously trying to make people happy at the end of the day, but while making myself happy. There's a wonderful give and take there, and the universe gives us so many opportunities throughout the day and throughout our lives to do those things, and I want people to just have that awareness, and ourselves. I want myself first, obviously, to have that awareness when the universe has said, here you go, man. Here's an opportunity for you to discover a new layer of peace. And I know that for you, that it's for all of us. You meditate a lot, and
There's some layers to that.
You train martial arts, and I love digging holes. Like, it's one of my favorite things in the world. It's a silly
Brings you
thing.
into the body. There's a presence that happens when you do that.
Yeah, and that flow state, you get into that Zen active meditation, and I really do appreciate that. But I also recognize that I know so little about it, and it's exciting because I'm learning so much about it too, and it happens by accident sometimes. I'm like, oh, that was it, and I get all pumped up,
Flow state.
Yeah, it's great, right? And I love that. I love that we're able to share that with each other, and I hope that people can find their way to that, however they do.
Well, as you were saying that, something that came up that I think is related, and I had thought about it earlier, was I think some people have this idea in their head that, and this goes into the unworthiness thing actually. So there's a fear of I shouldn't rally for myself, or I shouldn't be trying to help myself because that's selfish. I should be giving everything to everyone else. And what they don't realize is that it's not a win-lose thing. If you are helping yourself in the right way, it also benefits everyone else around you. So one of my favorite teachers, Abraham Hicks, talks about you can't get poor enough to help poor people get rich.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't get sick enough to help sick people get better.
Yeah.
It's like,
Right.
when you are taking care of yourself, you have more to give to other people.
Yes.
And so, of course, it's not to say that you should selfishly hoard these things and take away from it. It's about recognizing that you are useless and ineffective unless you take care of yourself. And that requires a degree of selfishness, but it's not selfishness. It's not small s selfishness, like ego selfishness. It's spirit selfishness, which recognizes your oneness with everyone.
Right.
On a certain level. When I interact with you guys or with Kylie, I see all of us as as me, but not me like Tim me, but like as a part of the consciousness that we all are.
The mirror.
So yeah, the
Right.
mirror. So if why would I want to hurt someone else for my own small selfish gain? Because I know that's not going to make me happy. It's not going to make them happy. It's not going to help anyone.
Right.
Whereas it could be something that we could build together and grow, and both of us would enjoy.
To go
Community.
on with Trevor, bringing it back to people who might not know what that means and what that looks like. For me, it's anytime I notice that I might be making people feel uncomfortable or awkward or something like that. That's when I notice that the mirror's really starting to show me who I am in that moment. And it's funny because that's one of the only times I really can notice that. And it does happen when I see people like, oh, they laughed at a joke I said, or or they're really like, we're vibing really good and we're having a really intense moment, or you're having like a good cry or a hug and a cry, which is like, I love that, where we can just be with each other and like care, that type of care. That would not have manifested for me in my life, and I think for you guys in your lives as well, had we not been able to get there on our own in some capacity. And there's a lot of mistakes that get made along the way doing that, because it can turn into that small s selfishness, and we're like, oh, well,
Right.
just kind of like hiding behind the curtain of who we are, right? And then we open up the curtain, and somebody saw who. Oh no, like now I'm vulnerable.
The
Now
mask.
I don't want to be vulnerable, but it's so important to rip that fucker open, and just, here I am, laid bare, man. Take me as I am, and respect the process enough to know that this is not all you're going to see ever. I am what I am is a very good statement to make, but it's not all you're ever going to be.
Right.
So I want to temper that sentiment a little bit, and we've talked about this before, about the ability to wear the mask for the game and be able to take the mask off freely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because on both sides, if you can't take the mask off because you're afraid, then you're controlled by it.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't put the mask on because you're resistant to it, you're controlled by it. Either way, you're controlled by it. You're not free.
I like when you say, if you don't wear the mask, you can't go to the masquerade.
Yes, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to give yourself the tools
Which
to
might
play
have
the
been
game.
might have been you. That you might have originally said that, but
Maybe.
either way, that sentiment's beautiful. I
Right.
100% agree with that. Yeah.
You know, so we have to put on a face for some things, but that doesn't change who you are.
Well,
deeply.
so in a social setting, for example, if you're right out of the gate to someone you don't know, just pure raw, you're gonna be like, whoa, why is this person like? Why are they being so much to me?
That is off-putting, yeah.
But if you have gotten to know someone for over a year and they still can't take that mask off, it's like, we're not going to connect. Like, come on, you got to take it off at some point. And those are the extreme examples of it, obviously. But
Show me who you are.
The role that I always think the role that I think is most important is to be able to hold the mask. You show up to the masquerade, you wear the mask. Hey, we're playing this game, right? This ego game. But guess what? That's not really who I am. Like, you know that's not who I am, and I know that's not who you are. But like, we could play. Why not? Like, let's have fun with it. Let's play the game. And then when it's time to take it off, we take it off. And some people, when you take it off, are gonna be like, "What? Like, no, I can't do that." Like, and they completely run away from you, and that's okay. Like,
That's such an
They're not
appropriate
there yet.
social tool.
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what
yeah.
that is, and it's a safe thing, and everyone should have a level of that in their life, I think, because it keeps you safe, it keeps the other person safe, and that's the mist in between the two mountains. You know what I mean? That kind of separate them, and eventually that mist clears away, and there's that beautiful valley, and here we are meeting in the middle. Like,
Yeah.
let's try.
It's part of making people feel safe.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
I'm not going to force you to take your mask off.
Yeah.
But I'm going to show you, like, look, it's okay. Like, I'm taking mine off, and I'm okay. Like, you can take yours off, too.
Setting
And
the
it gives,
example.
Gives them permission. Set the example.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
Allowing them to feel safe
Exactly.
with it.
Yeah.
One thing that I really would like to point out is something that, and I forget the name of the yogi, but it was said by an Ayurvedic yogi, and it clarified things for me, is that life is full of relationships, you know, relationships to ourselves, one another, and just the world around us. And the way that people act in their relationships deeply is a reflection of their relationship with themselves. And when I heard that, it blew my mind. You know, the way that you treat yourself is manifested in the way that you treat everybody around you, and that's why we have to start with that self-love.
The way
and
that you
self-care.
the way that you do anything is the way that you do everything.
Exactly.
And so exactly. And I think it's hardest to do that to yourself because of this idea that it's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
You can't own your own worth because it's selfish to do that. And you've been taught you're small, you should only care about other people.
Yeah.
And it's actually destructive to think that. Now that could be distorted, which I think here's the thing. That's where it's so hard. That can easily be distorted to you're being selfish if you care about yourself instead of helping someone else.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you can't help someone else anyway, then you have to help yourself because then you have value to give to them. That's the trade-off. Yeah.
Right.
I
And
think, go ahead. Go ahead.
the capital S selfishness there being the care. And I like to talk about, another thing that we talked about before is when you are whole and when you are cared for, that's when you can give your gift freely. Whatever it is that you're good at, give it to the world, and that is capital L love.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the love that's going to feed back into you, and
Yes.
you will feel fulfilled doing the thing that you want to be doing.
Yeah.
And that's the way that you should live your life.
It comes from
Coming
honesty.
from me.
It comes from honesty, patience, and to circle back around to the mask, you know, it's like who you are behind closed doors. And are you that moral? Are you that integral? The integrity of your life is, you know, predicated upon, are you that person always? And, you know, the social mask is an important tool, but that's obviously not like the be all end all in interaction. I think that for me, you know, social settings are a little bit tough for me, and you know,
Me too.
sometimes it takes we've had that talk, and
I struggle with that.
it takes me a little bit of like, you know, hyping myself up for the moment. It's easy after, you know, we've had as many interactions as we had, like we're like family now. We just kind of fall right in, and it's hugs, it's love all the time. But it's
Yeah,
new
of course.
people, like people I don't know. I'm always like, oh man, now I got to go and do this, kind of like feels like a fake thing for me to kind of like introductions and, you know, getting the small talk and all that. Like I really hate that, and
Yeah.
I try not to. I try to just see it as the tool, as the social, you know, fiber that eventually gets broke down, and now we can have our meal, you know, and we can be ourselves. And it's difficult, and I think that most people would probably agree in some regard that that's, you know, not always the most comfortable thing.
And again, it's all perception. So I also used to, when I was a kid, I was super shy. Like I dealt with shyness for my entire life, and definitely had social anxieties. Still do to an extent, but largely have overcome them. And I think a lot of it is it's perception. It always comes back to perception. So when you view something as a chore and something that's like, oh, I have to do this thing, well, there's another way to look at it. There again, to say that same thing where someone says something, you get triggered, another person wouldn't get triggered by it. Another person would view that exact same situation and view it as a joy. Like they're so excited to go do this thing.
They want to be the center of attention.
Right, and so
okay
and so there's a certain level of what do you want to enjoy or not enjoy? Because you could change your perception. There's nothing saying that you're locked into the way you perceive things now. If you wanted to, you could do the work to say like, okay, this subject in my life, me and this thing have a relationship, right? And this relationship is one of fear or anxiety. Well, if I look and sit with this thing for long enough and decide, I want to change the way that I'm looking at you, trusting that if I do that, then it will change the way it looks at me, which is exactly how it happens in practice. If you do that with any subject in your life, then it starts to slowly build momentum and transform. When something happens within this subject that has always happened to you, rather than going, ugh, and moving away and hating it, you go, okay, look, let's look at this. You change your perception. Now this starts the ball rolling. You put your foot in the door and cracked it open. That's all it takes. Yeah. As soon as that starts moving, you're going to get evidence coming back to you that what you're doing is actually changing your relationship with this subject in your life. And before long, the door just opens. The hardest part is just getting that foot in the door, getting that crack open. As soon as that happens, you're good.
I want to circle back a little bit, Tim, to you talking about you were a shy kid, and knowing you now, like nobody would ever guess that was the case. And
I know that these guys won't point it out, but both Tim and Paul are like more or less the biggest energy in the room. Everybody looks at them. Everybody sees you as soon as you walk in the door. You notice that energy, and it's because of the work that you've put in.
Thank you.
So you've come from that background.
Trevor's is far too kind, and he's being humble in that too, where he's also very much appreciated always with his presence at any time he's around. I always look forward to seeing him. But the thing with Tim, and thank you, I appreciate you. But the thing with the shyness, Tim, like I think that you're a great example of somebody who was born with a little bit of a social disadvantage in that way. Like you were just kind of naturally shy, and you said to me before, not to air out too much longer there, but since you were like, you would like hide behind your mom a little bit and be timid, and
when I was a kid,
just,
for sure,
just a beautiful, gentle little spirit, and then later in life you've grown into the man you are now, and you're so articulate and so just I always talk about your delivery system, like the way your brain works, the way that you can relate to just anybody, and just have a wonderful wealth, deep reservoir of feeling and knowledge. And I find it fascinating because me as a kid, I was the exact opposite. I was extroverted and loud and kind of obnoxious and annoying, to a degree. And later in life, I recognized that was something that needed to change in me, and I needed to be more reserved and more patient, and to be able to deliver myself, my true self, in a gentler way that wasn't abrasive and too much for people.
Well, I think that's the beauty of a lot of the conversations that we have is between the three of us, we come from such a triad of different experiences that when we come together without resisting each other, with just enjoying a good conversation, intellectual conversation, we come to these amazing places because we're seeing it from different views, and yet we're agreeing, but we're challenging each other because of where we come from, and it creates this really beautiful, all-encompassing, I don't even know how to say it, but what comes out of it is always something that is aligned and feels productive and fruitful and valuable, which again is why our friends told us that we needed to do something like this and start this. So I think that speaks to that, where we come from different backgrounds.
The equation that occurs within the group it's I don't know how to describe it other than it's just a beautiful natural metamorphosis. It's this care that occurs. But Trevor, like I think that, thanks for that. That's really a wonderful sentiment. But Trevor, I think that we've talked some about like your childhood and your upbringing, and I don't know if I've ever asked you like were you a shy kid? Were you an extroverted kid? Were you like more subdued? Were you like a combination of the two? Like, talk about that a little bit. I'm curious.
I suppose that I would speak when spoken to, and maybe act up a little bit occasionally, but I was sort of a mix of the two. I was reasonably shy, but you would start talking to me and then I'd say the most ridiculous stuff. I sort of was a gifted kid and always thinking ahead, and in the Excel program and reading several grade levels above where I was at the time, and I know the same was true for you. And so a lot of the times I felt disconnected from my peer group. So I developed in a really weird way, and even today, I would say that like when people talk to me, they get the sense that I have a little bit of an odd energy and just the way that I come at things. But it's just different. And so maybe I was a little bit of a shy kid.
Interesting.
But one of the things that we've said before, and I like this, in our group dynamic, we're all standing in different places, and we're all looking in different directions, but we're all pointed towards the truth. We're looking at the same thing,
Yeah.
regardless of our distance or the differences in perspective.
Yeah. And I'll also say this for humility, that we all have a certain amount of distortion. And so, you know, so if someone, for example, a lot of people don't understand that all the major religions that have actually gained a foothold are really talking about the same thing. It's looking at the object from this side and this side. Well, these are pointing in opposite directions, right? But they're pointed at the same object. And so it's important to realize, even though they might say it differently, the actual object is the same. You know, the where they're pointing is the same. There's an old adage about three blind men touching an animal, and one says, no, it's like a long trunk type thing, and one's like, no, it's this big broad surface. The other one's like, no, it's this tiny little like stick. And they're all touching an elephant, but they're all touching different parts of the elephant. And so because they're blind, they're all describing the same thing but in different ways. And I think that's true of the religions.
Exactly.
So to bring it back to the way that we're all viewing these things, we're all aiming at this truth, right? And I think this is true of everyone. I really do think that if someone is,
when you find it,
you know when you find it, and you know when you're on it and when you're not, if you're honest with yourself. And that takes a lot of awareness and courage, because to be radically honest with yourself is not easy. There's a lot of times when you know you're doing shit and you don't want to face it, so you just let yourself stay in the illusion that you're doing something right even though you're not.
And to contextualize how is that connected to alignment? I mean, that's what alignment is.
It's what
to
alignment
me.
is, exactly.
And we said that earlier. I just want to give a good definition for it.
Exactly. I think that's the perfect word for alignment, is that you're pointed towards the truth, that inner truth that's deeper than feelings. It's a knowingness. But it gets distorted by emotional trauma, conditioning, perception that's false, the shadow that you don't want to, see it within yourself. And so while we're all coming from different places and pointing at the same truth, we all have a certain amount of distortion. And because we're coming from different places, that distortion we see when it's happening within each other. And the discussion helps to mold it back, where it's my compass isn't quite aligned. And so it's like, where is it aligned? And then the three looking glasses line up, and the light just pierces through. You know what I mean? It's that sort of thing.
And you gain clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that speaks to the actual topic here about awareness and about, truth in general. It's like, what is truth? Truth is a lot of different things. And for a lot of different people, I think that there's certainly an opportunity in this conversation to bring up the objective truths and the personal truths, where there are things that are true whether you believe them or not, and there are personal truths that are things that kind of like define our perception of reality, and they can all be existing in the same space, and I think that that's important to recognize, where, I might think that something is exactly right for me, and it might be exactly right for me, and Trevor has something that's exactly right for him, but it doesn't work for me, and vice, all the way across the board. And we allow each other those things. We allow each other the space to have those things for ourselves, because that's our realities. That's our experience, the human condition that we're working ourselves through. And I love that. I love that about the interactions that we have. It's so stimulating, and it's so freeing and fair,
So part of that speaks to the idea between relative truths and absolute truths.
Yeah, the relative.
And so to honor someone's relative truth does not concede that it is the absolute truth, but it still allows someone to feel validated where they are. You know what I mean? To respect that someone views something in a certain way, and to be curious. Why do you see things that way? I'm curious about that, rather than saying, you're wrong, I'm right, listen to me. Like, even if objectively you are right and the other person is wrong, they still have a relative truth that's worth exploring and understanding, and that rounds out your ability to understand the world. So even if you are objectively true in this very siloed way, well, instead of being siloed, what if you expanded that and became very circular or orbital, like a spherical, about the way that you can see things? It allows you to speak to everyone where they are, because you respect their truth. You don't impose your truth upon them, but you understand where they're at and validate it to a degree without necessarily conceding that it is the absolute truth.
I struggle with that a lot, and I want to make a point here. I just want to back up a little bit and say that I think that there's different perspectives that everybody takes in the world, and everybody's got their own background, and people have different attitudes as well. Some people may lean towards being more empathetic and judging by feelings, whereas I know myself, I definitely judge based on analytical reasoning. And so I can be a little less caring, and I've made mistakes with that. And where I always get hung up in, or I have in the past and I'm working on, is when people tell me, like, oh, I'm depressed, or oh, I have this anxiety and I've got this hang up somewhere. And it's easy for me to say on the outside, let me reason you out of the box that you're in and tell you what the solution is. If you're depressed, clean your room, start with the basics. And it's easy for me to say that. And when I do say that, coming from where I come from, it's not a judgment. It's me being programmed to search for a solution.
Right, yeah.
I'm very guilty of that. But it's important to respect when people's relative truths put them in a situation. But what we need to do is give them the tools to work their way out of that situation.
So what I think you're speaking to now, and I don't want to dive too much into masculine, feminine qualities or archetypes, because I think that would be a great episode on its own. Mm-hmm. But there is a sense of someone who of fixing a problem analytically and supporting by understanding emotionally, and I think that's the masculine feminine paradigm. So in a relationship, I think a lot of men, for example, can't understand the person that they're with, the woman that they're with, in heterosexual relationships, because of the fact that they try to fix the problem when she just wants to feel heard and understood and supported. Mm-hmm. Whereas the reverse of that is he wants to fix the problem. And it's not necessarily, he wants the support, but it's like, and actually, I want to think about that one further, because I don't know that I have a clear-cut example on the reverse of that.
Because I think a lot of men in our society diminish their own feelings, as you were saying earlier.
I think that I was going to speak to that point as the reverse in that model, where, it's so easy to get caught in the trap of thinking that, men are just okay because that's their job to be okay and to be Mr. Fix-It. It's important to recognize that, we aren't supposed to fix everything. We're not supposed to have that responsibility always on our shoulders. And I think that if an opportunity speaks to you and, puts you in a position where you might be influential, or you might be able to ask for permission to insert yourself into another person's equation to try to help them through something and then do it together. That's the issue, I think, with relationship in general, is that people are just so worried about upholding their stance in a relationship, or upholding their philosophies, or their idea of what their life is supposed to be, that they forget to just step back from that and say, okay, let me see it from your side. Please give me the opportunity to show you what it means from my side, and let's meet in the middle, and then we become more together. And I think that a lot of people make that mistake across the board. Relationships
Absolutely.
are not.
And I think a big part of that is what we've been circling around this entire podcast, which is essentially being identified with your point of view or your perspective, to the point which is sort of like the emotional quality of pride, which is this is who I am, like my perspective is who I am, and I'm right. And if you dig yourself into that, you're putting yourself into a corner, because how could your perspective ever evolve and change and grow if that's what if that's who you are and that's what you think you are?
In other words, if you make your values synonymous with your identity, then anytime you warp your values or you change those, you're warping your identity as well, and it hurts when that happens. But it's because we get conflated there that there's that conflict at all.
Exactly, yeah. And so this is part of the work of releasing your identification with the ego. So the ego is all the false programs that you think are you but are not actually you. The image you have of yourself, or the abstraction that you have of yourself, and you believe that that's actually who you are. That's just a thought, right? It's just a thought energy that's just existing here, but you've now identified with it and believe that that's who you are. That's not who you are. This is who you are right here. This is who you are. And it's ineffable. You can't put it into words. You can't actually talk about it, because talking about it is just words, right? Mm-hmm. The experience is who you actually are, what you actually are, the awareness, the consciousness, the here-ness, the presence. And so when we're talking about that false identification with something, that's always some sort of egoic thing. It's always some sort of consciousness getting trapped in an idea, believing that that's what it is, and then creating all these weird spin-offs and distortions of reality. Now, that's also part of the game, right? That's why existence exists. It's to have the experience of being an ego. But eventually, the goal is to grow out of the ego and come back into that peaceful realm that's beyond that conditioned and image, abstraction, mental concept of yourself, and come back into the reality of of the self, which is not mental. It's not an abstract. It's not a symbolic version. It is this. It is what's real, you know?
I also think that what we talked about earlier about the social mask is a tool. Like the ego can also, when it's used in alignment, is also a tool, because there are places that
Agree
you can
completely.
go to in your heart and in your mind where you just strongly identify with a belief, and it may come across to some people as like highly, like you say, conflated, egotistical energy where you're just like so puffed up and feeling really cool and like big about yourself. But then there's moments where that is needed. Like you need to be able to like stand firm in your own 2 feet, even if it does come from a place of maybe a little bit of disaligned ego. It still might be true in that moment, and there's refinement that's needed there. And I think that it's, the complete removal of ego is an impossibility. I don't believe that exists, but I do believe that the further we learn about it, the more alignment we find with it, the better it serves us as a tool, in my opinion.
Yep.
What is it that you always say, Tim? Is that the ego is the thing that we're riding on? It's the horse. And
Right, yeah, the
we
animal.
are steering it.
Animal and the rider, yeah.
And you
that's
can't
great.
always tell the animal exactly what you want it to do. Like, it's going to do what it wants to do. It's an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we are steering it, certainly.
Yeah, and there's a lot of subdivisions we go into around like the difference between ego versus personality versus self, and a lot of conflicting definitions there.
Right.
So that's all semantics. So we don't need to worry about that right now. But that sentiment is, I think, important for a lot of people to understand. Is you have that executive function, which is sort of the rider on top of the elephant or the horse or the animal, whatever you want to. Whatever picture's best. I liked a dragon for a while. I was like, I'm the rider, and this is my dragon. Yeah. So you can tell the dragon what to do. You can train it how to move based on your commands. But if the dragon wants to go somewhere, you're fucked. Sorry, you're going that direction. Like, it's going to take you there.
Yep.
That's because you can't overpower it as a small little rider. So the question is not, and I think that you can notice this in certain movies and cinema that like show horse riders and things like that. When there's like an aligned rider who is like one with his horse. He and the horse have a relationship, and when he rides that horse, it does what he says because it trusts him, versus someone who just uses the horse as a tool and is like, I'll kill you and I don't care. It's like, I'll throw you into the fire. And it's like the horse doesn't trust him. It does what it has to do because it's basically the dichotomy between ruling out of fear or ruling out of love. And so to be one with your own animal, it's like your animal you're the rider, you're the little mind energy. Like, you can't make your body do whatever you want. The body's going to do what it does, right? So like that's where we get stuck in addiction patterns and things like that, where it's all this stuff that we want to do something else, but we can't help it. We end up doing this. Well, your animal is doing something that the rider doesn't want it to do. So how do you fix that? Well, you can't keep lashing it. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
That you've been doing that your whole life, right? It's just going to keep running away. What you need to do is make it feel safe. Make it feel like it can connect with you. Once you have this connection and you've given it so much love, why wouldn't it want to do what you want? It loves you because you love it. It's going to want to do what you do. That's self-love. That's the power of self-love. Mm-hmm. You completely abolish all of those negative habits and negative programs within yourself when you can circle back into this love of self and allow and become more effective. That's the release of the shadow. That's the integration of self. That's healing. How much more effective are you in the world? How much can you help heal others if you do that? You heal the world by healing yourself.
Exactly. I had something I wanted to say, but I forgot. Because I got so wrapped up in that.
I think that that's a wonderful, wonderful way to describe it. And, I find, as a person who spent the better part of a decade, like, resisting his ego and fighting against it in complete fear of what it would mean if I reignited that part of myself, and not even really fully realizing that I was 100% stuck in my ego at that time because I was resisting it so hard, and
didn't have a
I didn't have a leg to stand on with it.
You
and
weren't ready to wake up.
Wasn't ready, and then that a few interactions happened, some tough times, and some really, really deep, hard conversations led me to a place where I recognized that, this is not me. It's not really me, because I was just so polarized to one side, and I'm always trying to find that balance and find the middle of it. And I am happy to say that there's been many opportunities to succeed in that, and I have done better, and it feels good to know that I'm not necessarily in control of that, but I'm able to just recognize the patterns and work my way through the patterns, and I think that everyone can do that. And I know that it's we went pretty hard on ego, but that is, man, we could talk for weeks about that, and not even really
that will
break
be a
it all
good episode.
down.
Ego.
For sure.
And I'm sure we'll
And
talk more.
where I worry
Absolutely.
a little bit is how esoteric that might come across to people who are just beginning to do the work and beginning to understand the what it is conditioning yourself to have a certain response in certain situations. Like when you get triggered, that immediate emotional response that you have, you can't give in to that. You have to recognize that it is a response, and then you will decide what to do next. That's the trigger.
Yep. And I think that goes back to for a lot of people. So as like sort of a prescription for a lot of people who might not be used to this work. For some people, the first prescription is just start acknowledging your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Just start like it will be annoying because you'll go through your life and you'll have to acknowledge, oh wait, hold on, I'm feeling something right now, and your mind's going to say that's a waste of time. I want to keep doing this thing because this is what has to happen. But to take a second to kind of step back and check in with your body meditatively, it's called recognition actually, to multiple times throughout the day. Just have that 5-second moment of recognition. Wait, hold on. Let's check in right now. Like, what's going on in my mind? What am I feeling in my body? Just kind of come back to the present moment and sort of like connect with yourself again. Take that moment. Do that enough times. And meditation, by the way, is basically a string of those moments lined up together in a block of time. But enough of those moments and you start to recognize that you are feeling things, right? So you come into a recognition of your emotions. Because some people don't have any recognition of emotion at all.
They just feel it.
It just,
And it's
it's
raw.
it's unconscious, right?
resisted, you know, they just shut themselves all the way down and there's nothing getting in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, first of all, recognizing that you have emotions. Second of all, recognizing what triggers you to contract or expand. So there's a very obvious difference between emotions that cause contraction in the body and emotions that cause you to expand and feel elated, right? So if you fall in love for the first time in your life and you're head over heels honeymoon phase, you are expanded. You feel like the world is your oyster. Everything is possible. So many people find physical healing in that experience. Like aches and pains they used to have go away because their body is literally elated and full of energy because they are experiencing this emotion. Versus someone who's deeply depressed and it's just contracted and small and just their energy field has just completely reduced. Recognize those emotions and do not judge them. That's the hardest part, because especially if you're someone who is in a depressed state, you're going to see how often you're contracted, and it could add to your depression, right? It could be a reason to hate on yourself and feel smaller. That's not the point. The point is just to recognize that. Mm-hmm. Because the path of healing is to first recognize where you're at. If you have a map in front of you and here's the destination, don't you want to know where you are? If you're here and you just want to kind of fog it up and pretend that you're here or something, are you going to be able to cross that bridge or cross that river or climb that mountain? No, you have no clue where you are. You have to know where you are. So the harsh reality of knowing where you are, it's a step that has to be taken, and that requires awareness. It requires a commitment to coming back to that place. Saying, okay, this is where I am. Yeah, it fucking sucks. Okay, fine. It sucks. That's where you are. Don't judge it. If you judge it, you're just pulling up the clouds again. You're falling back into the conditioning. You're falling back into the system.
Be gentle with yourself.
And it will recycle.
And it will recycle, exactly. So be gentle with yourself. Perfect advice. Mm-hmm. Once you recognize when you're contracted and when you're expanded, now you can start to, do more things that make you feel expanded. Because while a lot of what I think we're going to talk about is about detaching yourself from the conditions and needing a condition to make me happy, at the same time, there are conditions that right now in your life make you happy. And that can be a step up. You know what I mean? If you are someone who's depressed and you won't take a nice, relaxing bath or go get a massage or go work out, you know what I mean? Those things are all things that make you feel better about yourself. Mm-hmm. If you just do those things, it's an immediate boost. Now, the big thing is don't get hooked on the condition. Stay unconditional, which means that you want to start changing your perception on things to be happier, to be freer. Now, that's not to say go into the toxic positivity route, which is someone who denies the negativity to try to stay positive all the time. Mm-hmm. Instead, look at where you're negative, release on it, just watch it with loving neutrality is the way to describe that. Loving neutrality. And in time, insights will come to you about why you do what you do, and they'll fall away without much effort. But you have to put in that willingness to be the courageous leader, the wise, courageous leader that watches yourself when you're in turmoil without buying into it and without denying it. That's the polarity. Buying into or denying it. Step out of the polarity.
That first step of realizing and seeing where you are, you know, and in that uncomfortable place. it is a place where you redefine your conditions for yourself and your life. You rebuild the entire construct from the ground up. It is raw, it's fresh, it's scary, it's absolutely frightening. It's absolutely frightening. And anyone that says it's not good for them for having a better experience, but I
Being
think
very
that
strong.
I would question if they had the real experience
Yes.
if that's the case.
If they're being honest.
Yes, and as you move through that, it's there's as we have moved through it, as anyone can move through it, it's entirely doable and it's entirely knowable, and it is there. That freedom, that ability to look at yourself plainly and just say, I want different things. I want my life to be different. I want it to look different, and just do that. And I think what we need to do is, as we move forward in conversation, as we do podcasts, bring up literature and tag some really good people
it'll
who
happen,
learn. Man, yeah, we need to do that because there's so much great information about all the stuff that we're rapping about. And I know Tim has a litany of books that he would love to be able to just post up for people to read. I'm sure Trevor has pounds of literature. And I'm just building my library ever so slightly as I go on, but I intend to read Letting Go. I have it on the bedside, there with a couple other things. And one of the things that helps me with reading too, as you move forward, if you don't like reading so much, man, podcasts. Man, there's so much information out there,
you can
audiobooks.
just listen.
Yeah, man, just buy a good audiobook program, plug that thing in as you're working throughout the day.
Or even lectures from spiritual teachers in the past, or not even spiritual teachers, motivational teachers. Yeah, YouTube is a great resource.
And so I think that the real central topic that we're dancing around is self-improvement tonight, and it's all about being a better, more whole person. And the things that you can do that we've been talking about are tools. That's what I like to think about it. They're mental and psychological tools that you can use to defeat the conditioning,
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. and not only improving but understanding, because improving could be polarized to say like I'm bad and need to get better, but the real way to improve is to just understand, right? To be compassionate with yourself and understand yourself, and then naturally you are better. You know what I mean? It's not outcome
that you're
oriented.
being a better person. You're just being a more complete person.
Yeah.
Someone who's more intact on their own.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy for somebody who might be in a really deep depression to listen to what we've said and say, oh, well, you're just telling me to do all the right things and then I'll feel better. And maybe you feel like that's not realistic, but, there are lights in your life. You have to look around. There's got to be something that brings you energy and is light. And so if you just pretend to be a moth, bumble around as much as you need to, as long as you're moving towards the light and you're finding the things that are right for you, that's the only way forward if you're completely lost.
Yep.
Well, it was so funny you say that because I believe it can be the most ridiculous, simple, mundane things that we might think they're like. For me, it was leaves. The smell of like fresh leaves. There's something about that earthen, decaying thing.
Recognizing and augmenting the pleasure that you get from that.
Bro, like it totally flooded me with emotion, and I'm like, what is this? I'm feeling. I don't know what this feels like. What is this crazy thing? Why do I feel this way? And then be courageous enough to explore that feeling and not be down on yourself for that. Some people, especially men, I think, when they start having those deep emotions, they're like, I'm not supposed to feel that way. I'm supposed to be tough. I'm supposed to be a hard ass or whatever. And that's horseshit. You're not supposed to be a hard ass in that moment. You're supposed to enjoy the smell of the fucking leaves. Don't be afraid to do that, man. It's totally healing and it's
Feel
enlightening.
yourself.
Yeah.
Feel yourself. Revitalize
It can
yourself.
be that simple, and it often is for a lot of people. And those moments pass us by all the time. We get so busy toiling and moving through life that we forget to stop and smell the fucking roses.
Absolutely.
Let's do that more. And we do. We try very much so. We have days where we work together. I'll just stop and I'll just take a deep breath and just receive sunlight. That one does like, dude, come here, feel the sunlight. Doesn't that feel good? Like just the simple things that I really love to do that I found that just make me tick, that just get me going and just make me able to just contend with life on life's terms.
Well, I like to rationalize things.
Rock and roll,
to
brother.
go with that, I'd say that that's a tool, but that tool is called mindfulness. And being present in the moment and just accepting what is happening. You're a living being and stuff's going on around you, and it's pretty freaking awesome to be here.
If you just appreciate the sensations without labeling them, then they're actually pretty great. It's the story that you tell, which also leads back to that question about willingness. Like, are you willing to change your perception, or are you attached to your perception? Do you not? So someone who might be stuck in this deep state of depression, important to ask yourself: do you actually want to change? Like, or are you getting something out of it?
Or
Like,
are you identifying?
are you identifying with it? And so it might not be an easy path, but the longer that you continue playing the victim mindset and thinking that everything's happening to you as an outer circumstance, the longer you're going to hold yourself in that place. Do you want to keep doing that, or do you or not? That's the question. And it's trust me, it's very hard when you're in it to decide that to discern that. In that moment, it's very hard to discern that.
It is.
So in a moment when you're feeling kind of good, right? Then ask yourself, is this really what I want? And immediately, if you fall into condemnation of yourself, you're going to fall back into depression, guaranteed.
Yeah.
If you do not condemn yourself and just look at it honestly, objectively, loving neutrality, or
no expectations of what it's supposed to be.
no expectations of what it's supposed to be, no labeling.
Yeah.
Then you'll understand and you'll start to grow out of it. You won't repeat the cycles that you are continuing. But again, if that's not for you, it's a choice. It's completely a choice. You don't need to wake up. So
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, I think it's a great end.
That's a great.
We're right at about an hour, so
Beautiful.
we thank you guys for listening. For whoever has made it this far into it, this is a very fun first podcast, and we are very excited to see where this goes in the future. Any last notes, guys?
I love you guys.
I got so many things to talk about.
Love you
I
guys
love
too.
you guys.
I love you guys.
We're gonna have some good talks in the future. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you all. We'll see you on the next one.
See you on the next one.